Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Lisa Christensen, President and CEO of the Alaska World Affairs Council. It is such a pleasure to be here today with everyone virtually for our Alaska World Affairs Council program. We are featuring today Dr. Dong Wang, who will be speaking about frontiers and US-China relations, moderated by the ever-popular Dr. Paul Dunscombe. It's about 34 degrees in Anchorage, trying to snow. We hope the air is clean and fresh and you're warm wherever you are in the world. Our speaker is joining us today from Germany on the border of Netherlands, and we hope she is warm where she is as well. If you're joining us today, please tell us hello in our chat function. Say where you are around the world and say hello to our speakers. If you have any issues that you need technical help, just let us know there. Siobhan Choi is our technician guru, and she'll help you out and get you back on track. We are one of 90 plus councils around the United States in the World Affairs Council of America systems. We've been here in Alaska longer than Alaska's been a state, and we are so excited to be able to feature programs like this. And it's because of our sponsors and supporters that we've been able to do this for such a long time. So thank you to all of our supporters and sponsors, especially the Atwood Foundation, making this part of the distinguished Evangeline Atwood Speaker Series. And these programs are open and we welcome everyone to join. If you've missed any of the upcoming programs in our pre-program slide deck, we're going to show them again at the end. They're also on our website, but we're adding them continuously. So please check us out, get on our email. We'll send you messages about what's coming up. A lot is coming up right here. So get your calendars out, put on there our World Whiz Pub Trivia. We are heading outside for the first time ever. That is coming up right here on February 3rd from 6 to 8. We are doing a drive-in movie and trivia with, of course, Dr. Dunscombe, our ever wonderful moderator. I've taken a peek at some of the questions this year. They're the best ever. You don't want to miss out on that. That is February 3rd from 6 to 8. It's a fundraiser for our student programs in the World Affairs Council. Our Student World Quest competition is coming back in person, and those are where high school teams of 4 compete on foreign affairs, geography, current events. We're going to be at the Beartooth, and that's going to be on February 10th from 9:30 to 1. If you have a high schooler, let them know. They can still sign up, and it's a lot of fun and a whole bunch of learning going on that day. We also have, we've been working on this for about a year, the growing influence of cryptocurrency with Yaya Fanusi. He's going to be here for back-to-back programs in the evening at the museum on February 10th, and then at the Beartooth on the 11th. You won't want to miss that. And then coming up on our screen or our website soon is going to be our program on Women's Day. We are having a Women's Day panel on International Women's Day, which is March 8th at the Beartooth from noon to 1. We're featuring a panel on Alaskan Indigenous leaders, the next gens, and their vision for the future. We're also bringing in the 77th Secretary of the Navy and Ambassador Kenneth Braithwaite. He'll be coming in April. So come check that one out too. More information soon about this program on Arctic national security, peace, and stability in the region. We also have raffle tickets. If you are dreaming of someplace warmer, then Alaska Airline tickets are for you. You can get them online, and we'll be drawing the winner at our World Whiz drive-in movie evening and trivia. Our program today, Frontiers and US-China Relations, will feature a captivating conversation for about 30 minutes. It's going to be followed by a Q&A with including all of you. So as you think of your questions, you can either type them in the chat function or the Q&A, and we'll read them at the end. Or if you'd like to ask them in person, just raise up your virtual hand or let us know in the Q&A, and I'll bring you on screen and you can ask your question in person on screen to our speakers. And now I'd like to hand over the microphone over to Dr. Dunscombe, who is Professor of East Asian History at UAA. He is chair of the program committee at the Alaska World Affairs Council. And as I mentioned, he's our illustrious MC at our annual World Whiz Pub Trivia Night and the Academic World Quest Competition Students for Students. You may not know that he worked in broadcast television for several years before beginning graduate studies in history. And I have to mention that today marks my 15th anniversary at the Alaska World Affairs Council. And I just estimated that I have brought to the stage over 450 speakers during this time in those 15 years. And I've had the pleasure of working and featuring Dr. Dunscombe more than anybody else. And with that, I would like to hand the microphone once again over to you, our moderator, Dr. Paul Dunscombe.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and congratulations. It's nice to hear those statistics. I'm very, very pleased. And thank you for all the work that you've done for us over those 15 years. It's really been quite spectacular. Our guest today, Dr. Dong Wang, is truly a woman of the world. She operates in the Boston area, the Lower Rhine of Germany, Shanghai. She conducts original research in Chinese, English, French, German, and Japanese. Since 2016, Dr. Wang has served as Distinguished Professor of History and Director of the Wellington Koo Institute for Modern China in World History at Shanghai University. She's a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, an elected fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland. She's a recipient of multiple fellowships and a research associate at the Fairbanks Center of Harvard University since 2002. She's a member of numerous editorial boards for academic journals in several languages. Needless to say, she is also author of several books, also in numerous languages. Now, what you might not know about Dr. Wang is that, like me, she is a Jayhawk. We first met a distressingly large number of years ago in Professor Daniel Bay's Modern China seminar at the University of Kansas. And as a TAs, we had the pleasure of co-teaching a section of East Asian Civ there. Dr. Wang was kind enough to have me out to Shanghai University in the fall of 2017 to talk about East Asia and Alaska. And while I would very much like to have her join us physically in Alaska someday soon, I'm very pleased that she's able to join us here virtually today. It's very, very lovely to have you with us, Dr. Wang. Thank you so much for joining us today. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Paul and Lisa. Warm greetings from Northwest Germany, everybody. I'm very grateful to the Alaska World Affairs Council for the invitation, and to Lisa, Paul, and other colleagues for putting together this program together. It's such a privilege to converse with you all, to be able to share some stories and ideas about an important topic many people are concerned with. So I'm very much looking forward to be able to have this conversation and interacting with our audience.
Wonderful. So here is the second edition of your book, The United States and China. The first edition came out in 2013, which isn't necessarily that long ago, but you note in the introduction that about 3 years ago or so, you began to feel that a revised version of the book was necessary. And that ultimately begs the question, what changed since the first edition of your book came out in 2013 that convinced you that it was time for a second edition?
Thank you, Paul, for asking this question. Yeah, if we look at actually the cover image of the second edition of my US-China book, we will get a sense of the national and international mood about this topic. Mm-hmm. And particularly if we also could revisit the also cover image of the first edition, we'll see the contrast clearly. Yeah, here is the image of also a cartoon by an Irish cartoonist in the, I think in 2009, published in The Economist. So I was very struck by the cover image then. And now, shall we go back to the first, the slide, the cover image, yes. The second edition image is historical. It's from 1900 by American cartoonist. It is about the Boxer Rebellion, particularly, I think, the Qing, at the time, the Qing government's handling of the Boxer uprising. So we see a very steadfast Uncle Sam, very expressive here. So now what has changed in the course of less than 10 years, would you say simply in 7 years? First of all, it has to do with actually my own publisher, longtime publisher at Roma Littlefield. I know many colleagues have been using this textbook in their own classroom teaching. Roma Littlefield has been publishing many good books, particularly on the subject of China and also the US foreign relations. So my publisher has been very interested in publishing the second edition. So anyway, then the time was ripe because the pandemic broke out, and I was fortunate actually to be able to work from home in Northwest Germany and also Central Paris. So pretty much this book, the second edition, the revised edition of the US-China book is a product of for the most part, of the pandemic experience as well, put it this way. Now, very specifically, obviously, the bilateral relationship has gotten worse. One can say safely that it is at the lowest point in half of a century. Actually, in this coming February would mark the 50 years anniversary of the diplomatic rapprochement between the two countries, two great countries, the PRC, People's Republic, and the United States. But the tension is on, and I think will be on in the foreseeable future. Now, what the secondly is, I think what changed is that the United States feels that it must confront the PRC after all these years of unsuccessful efforts to change, to change the PRC for the better. There has been an ongoing soul search on the side of the United States. It can be quite painful for many Americans and others, especially, I would say, some elites across the Atlantic Ocean, who probably, some of them, okay, cannot face with comfort what they wrote on the subject a short while ago. Some people also think it is the West who created its own Frankenstein during the last 4 decades. Now, the second, another change, obviously, it's the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been for over 2 years. The world suffered enormously. Close to 6 million people died. So, and we have witnessed the wolf of diplomacy and mask and vaccine diplomacy on a full scale to this day, of course, we still don't know definitively about the origins of the COVID-19 that has taken so many lives. So, and then of course, there is this race ongoing, race for a better approach to the pandemic, and whose approach is better. We have seen a great deal of this information and misinformation, depending on one's political, cultural orientation. So that's another change. And they, of course, the third change is the China I saw in 2012 when I was writing the first edition of the book was different from the one we saw today. The omnipresence of the Chinese Communist Party is felt in nearly all corners of the Chinese life, and I would say nearly all corners of the world today. The PRC has become, to many people, largely a surveillance state that makes for, we say, a low quality of life among many factors.
So one of the points that you make early on in your book is that looking at the history of this relationship between the US and China over time, while the actual number of people, either Chinese or Americans, who have actually had a chance to kind of lay hands on the relationship, actually conduct the relationship to further interactions between the US and China is really actually very modest. It's only very relatively few people. Yet even from the beginning, with the start of the Canton trade between the United States and China, this relationship seems to have had a rather outsized influence, certainly on Americans, and I think to a certain extent also on Chinese. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of influence, I think it carries both positive and negative components. So may I ask to show the slide? Yes, this is actually also another book produced during the pandemic, published in June 2020. So the actually this book handles the geoculture. So then positively, I would say Americans have always had a soft spot for Chinese culture, cultural heritage. It's a hard working people and long-lived unbroken civilization, as best manifested in early US merchants, missionaries, and missionary diplomats, some of whom were changed by China, championing mutual accommodation, turning themselves into pioneering sinologists, China hands, guardians of Chinese antiquities, and patrons, so on and so forth. So this book actually covers some outstanding, very important Americans who play such a role and who were heavily influenced by China. They were fascinated with Chinese culture, Chinese artifacts, and Chinese ancient sites. And in the meantime, of course, in the age of America's rise at the turn of the 20th century, it helped Americans to set its own national agenda and to be more global, to be able to understand more about others. So such as like Charles Long Freya, who donated the enormous amount, the gallery to the federal government. So he was an important and influential patron. So that is an example. And of course, there are many missionaries. I wouldn't go into that. And I have written actually a book on the topic, and of course in the US-China book, the topic of missions and Christianity has been covered throughout the book. Now the influence, of course, I said it's really, I think many Americans have been influenced, touched by the Chinese people's tenacity, creativity, and the will to struggle for a better life. And the harsh physical conditions. Of course, a classical example is the Good Earth, Paul Bach's Good Earth. And to give you another example, today's example is very often when I was in Shanghai, is the taxi drivers. Many of them, they work 24 hours every other day. It is quite harsh, yet I think people still fighting for a better life. So with very limited resources. Now, of course, on the other side of influence, we cannot avoid the kind of the negative part. So some American novelists, screenwriters, and scholars also wrote about the so-called red infiltration in Taiwan, United States, and other parts of the world. This can be seen in some classical Hollywood movies. Thank you for showing that. Actually, I was going to the slide, please. Can I have it? It's the student and the Uncle Sam, that one. So the frontispiece a moment ago you were viewing. Anyway, in some classical Hollywood movies, of course, we can see, yeah, here it's a positive example. It's really, it expressed the Chinese students studying in the United States, their good feelings about Uncle Sam. Mainly this is in the early 20th century in appreciation of the United States Congress decision to return the Boxer indemnity to China, and mainly for the purpose of financing the Chinese young Chinese students to come to the United States to study. It has influenced a whole generation, and you can see here the Chinese students were very much grateful to the goodwill of Uncle Sam. So obviously it's a very complex, relationship. And as I said, this is the frontispiece of the first edition, of the book. Now, of course, I'm positive some of you have seen. Now, speaking of the other side, because as I said, of influence, it's unavoidable. It would be dishonest to honor history. So I'm sure some of you have seen the movie, The Manchurian Candidate. I know there is a new version, but I use the 1962's movie featured by Frank Sinatra. So anyway, so that's another aspect. And what else? The last point is the influence outside the influence on America. That would be definitely, we cannot avoid it again. It's the US firms, the ongoing and the individual investment in the PRC capital markets. Unfortunately, some due to lack of transparency, probably the funds would be used for the military industrial complex. So all of these have raised eyebrows, and the main thing is what to do, how to deal with it. We could have a discussion, I hope, later in this program.
Yes, and I'm quite certain it's the case that ordinary Americans are really kind of unaware of the extent to which, economically, they are influenced and affected by the economic relationship between China and the United States. And that's, something that's got very, very deep roots, as you mentioned in the book. So you also talked about the fact that there had been kind of a shift in the basic kind of orientation of the People's Republic of China about 2012. I refer to it as, if you talk about kind of three big transitions in the history of the People's Republic of China, you have PRC 1.0, that's the People's Republic under Mao. You have PRC 2.0, that's the one that comes about through the policy of reform and opening up under Deng Xiaoping, the desire to pursue economic development and engage with the world once again. And that shifted to kind of PRC 3.0 between 2008 and 2012. So I wonder if you could talk about your take on what is the fundamental foreign policy of the People's Republic of China now, and really how did that come to be?
Thank you for the question regarding the fundamentals of the PRC foreign policy. I think it's being made public by the PRC that I am actually pretty much quoting what the PRC former ambassador to the United States has said, actually just on the last day of 2021, December 31st, 2021. I think it's made public that to fight against the United States and economic competition on the world stage are their fundamental foreign policy. This, as I said, there was a talk given by Cui Tiankai just 2 weeks ago, at least made public 2 weeks ago. And also there was an interview published in the Liberation Daily. I'm literally translating the title of the newspaper. It's called 解放日报 in Shanghai. So given by Wu Xinbo, who has been the main scholar on this topic. So he argued for economic competition with the United States, not ideological one. So that's one thing we should make a note of it. Now, the second aspect is also very rarely people will talk about. All people have been talking about it. It's the America's decoupling effort. Actually, as a matter of fact, decoupling implemented by the PRC has been going on for many years. And so literally, I mean, just a very quick example, it's, Google, all the many of the American apps, most of it, I think even Yahoo is forbidden there. So, and in the meantime, the majority of Chinese people don't have access to it, and even if they use VPN, it's forbidden there. It's an offense. Also, contacting foreigners beyond a certain reasonable constraints, then it's also illegal. So this is all laws. It's not like what we, yeah, one imagines it's not. So that's actually the Chinese side's decoupling actually has
So
been
by decoupling, you're referring to a process whereby the Chinese government is attempting to a certain extent, isolate Chinese society from the global information and the internet.
I suppose so. That's one aspect. The other aspect, I think, to be able to better control the general public, to control what they say, what they write, and also to encourage, or if not coerce, its own people to say good things about about own country. So that has been going on, and it's especially so. As I said, never have, as an independent, scholar, never have I encountered this kind of situation, and it's ongoing. I hope it's not getting worse. So. And in the meantime, it channels our foreigners who want to at least have some kind of contact with the Chinese people into one single meme, basically, to use the Chinese apps. Yeah, WeChat. So, but that is heavily monitored. So that's the reality, I think, for all of us to have to deal with. And in the meantime, of course, we all know that the PRC is taking full advantage of the liberal democracy's openness and resources to wage campaigns against liberal democracy. So. And let me see, another thing we should talk, of course, it's the recalibrating international relations built on PRC's previous experience, particularly with the third world or developing world, and because the PRC to many developing countries is a model. Because I have had a lot of students from Africa, from the Middle East, from Southeast Asia. So then it's because the PRC, the development, Chinese development is probably half of a step ahead of them, so that it's an easy model for them it's a model to learn. So, and then of course, there are other things we can talk about in the course of this conversation. So, and then the other thing I think I must remind everybody is the number 4th point, which is quite important, a whole component of the PRC foreign policy in the last, particularly in the last 10 years, that is, it has intensified its use of Chinese tradition to launch charm offense to charm foreigners, particularly I think China scholars, and while totalizing its society and higher education to monitor its own nationals and foreigners.
So, certainly we have some examples of this with Confucius Institutes and various other things. But I think also one of the things that you're certainly referring to is, I think, certainly amongst those changes that took place between 2008 and 2012 was that the leadership of the People's Republic really kind of determined that they had more power to kind of set the terms of China's relationship with the world than had been previously the case. And they're kind of been pursuing that policy, I think, rather determinedly since then.
You're right. I think because many Chinese people, and not to mention the Chinese government, they feel it's their turn to to rejuvenate, to lead the world, to rejuvenate its nation. So I think on that account, of course, all nation states are entitled to pursue their own national greatness. But I think it has to be dealt with on a case by case basis.
So you're most of us, of course, are familiar with the so-called Belt and Road Initiative. That's kind of the major program that the People's Republic has been pursuing. But I also found a less familiar phrase in your book, the so-called desire to create a community of common destiny. And I wonder if you could expand a bit more on what that phrase actually means when uttered by the Chinese government.
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. Yeah, it seems actually, I think sometimes academics we need a lot to make a lot of effort to stay tuned, put it this way, because very often I feel it's it's so restless and it changes so much, of course, and anyway, what it means, well, speaking of this very important geostrategy, or I think it's the Chinese way to project his world, to convince the world. It's this one. It's a community of common destiny. This I think was first used in 2013 in China's Peaceful Development White Paper. So in the PRC discourse, I'm now quoting because I have to quote to be able to, I think, to make it clear, I hope. And I should put a note that I noticed you may know that actually in the PRC National Social Science Scheme, which I'm not allowed to be part of or to apply or nothing. No, I cannot. And basically, there are many major so-called national paramountly important projects are devoted to this topic. Now, what it means, in the PRC discourse, it refers to a common community of common destiny, refers to the adapted version of the CCP's vision to liberate the entire humanity from the oppression of capitalism and imperialism and hypocritical Western ideas of social organization during the 21st century in order for China to create a harmonious world and the future for the world. In other words, I'm now again quoting, the CCP intellectuals consider the community of common destiny based on Marxist materialism, the Communist Manifesto, and Chinese cultural tradition. The community of common destiny, or the CCD, the goals, again, I'm quoting here, okay? Quote, co-prosperity, equitability, justice, end quote. In the CCP discourse, the community of common destiny, the notion is meant to provide the PRC a higher moral ground to fight against the anti-PRC discourse, to control international discussions, and also to be able to, for the PRC to set the discussion questions and agenda, and to create a more friendly international environment for its international dominance. I'm not creating this by myself, I'm just quoting basically. And then I should probably, since this is Alaska, may I quote the last year's Alaskan summit to give you a better idea of what many people considered as from the Chinese side, they think they need to have more say to the world and in the world's discussion and discourse in asserting their own narratives. And of course, to many other people, it is, as I said, they disagree. It's propaganda. But may I quote, since this is in Alaska, in Anchorage, and may I quote the PRC State Councilor Yang Jiechi's opening remarks given in March 2021 in Alaska.
Please do.
I'm quoting here. It's the same spirit. Okay, what it means, because Councilor Yang said, quote, "Our values are the same as the common values of humanity. These are peace, development, fairness, freedom, and democracy. What China and the international community follow or uphold is the United Nations centered international system and the international order underpinned by international law. So we believe that it is important for the United States to stop advancing its own democracy in the rest of the world," end quote.
So there is distinctly a challenge there, although you also mentioned earlier the speech recently released by the ambassador to the Chinese ambassador to the United States, talking about pursuing the competition more on economic lines than ideological lines. So I'm wondering if there's perhaps a slight modification of that policy underway.
I think probably, but so far as I have seen, is basically is emphasize economic for the PRC is to continue to promote, encourage economic competition, whereas promoting Chinese cultural tradition around the world.
So quite apart from any ideological confrontation that may take place between the US and China in the future, one other item that's likely to complicate our relationship is Taiwan, and also to a certain extent Hong Kong. And I wonder if you could comment on either of those and what they're likely to do to the relationship going forward.
Yeah, thank you. These are also very contentious issue, obviously, but I think since, this is a kind of conversation, so I think we need to be very candid. So now, obviously, I think everybody knows regarding Taiwan, the US policy and the PRC policy. And of course, all the strategic ambiguity. I invite actually our audience to read through the Shanghai communique issued on February 28th, 1972, and August 17th, 1982's the joint communique. I think it's what it says, the United States, the wording is very, of course, it's very carefully made. So the US acknowledged that Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Strait wanted one China, and Taiwan, and that Taiwan was part of China. I'm quoting, this is one aspect we must understand, okay, the US policy. But of course, it's policy, foreign policy can always change. So I'd like to remind you all. And then of course, Taiwan is a core national interest for the PRC. So, but the United States also indicates that it did not challenge that position, leaving the question of Taiwan to the Chinese people themselves, means both Taiwan and mainland China. Now, in short, if you're interested, you can read into read more the above documents. But as I said, as an independent scholar, I must also indicate the second aspect. That is actually, you may not know, but I just, as I said, out of my own intellectual integrity, I have to inform that legally, in international law, the territory of Formosa is an open question. Legally. I must, as I said, one might be wondering why, and I would invite you to read the only so far the legal document, put it this way, and for all the signing countries to abide by, is the 1951 San Francisco Peace Treaty with Japan, because Taiwan was the former colony of Japan. But in that treaty, Article 2, there were two declarations. In the first one, the Article 2, actually it only indicates that Japan agreed to cede the island of Formosa, nothing else. So then anyway, if you want to know more, as I said again already, this is legal, from the legal point of view. Then people would say the Cairo conference, what about that? But that was a declaration, not a peace treaty. So if you want to know more, I suggest you read actually an excellent book by Canadian, the former journalist, Jonathan Manthorpe. So to be able to really and to understand all the contentious issues, and we can of course discuss more later on.
So, but talking a little bit about Hong Kong, so it struck me that for a very long time, especially once Hong Kong returned to China in 1997 under this whole notion of one country and two systems, that the government of the PRC was willing to kind of put up with the potential political challenge of Hong Kong because it wanted the economic benefits of Hong Kong. And I suspect seeing one country and two systems kind of go away here, the PRC increasingly imposing itself on Hong Kong, I'm inclined to think that calculus has changed. Is that an analysis that you would kind of agree with, or would you think there's something else going on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually myself have worked in Hong Kong in 2001 to 2002 on American fellowship provided by the American USChina Foundation. Speaking of the influence, that's another positive influence actually. Anyway, so I loved Hong Kong. Now, to answer your question, first of all, I think this we should note that the PRC, as far as I know, is not using the term one country, two systems that much anymore. So that's one thing we should make a note of. Now, the changes taking place in Hong Kong in the last few years is the result of several combined elements that we can identify as follows. First, I think it's the ongoing human and economic integration of Hong Kong and the Greater Bay or the Po River Delta Cantonese region. It's long in the planning to make Hong Kong part of a normal Chinese city. So that's one element we should know of. And then the second is the long existing CCP influence in Hong Kong since its birth, I think, over a century ago. So it has played a significant role in the crackdown on Hong Kong's democratic movements and protests. So I can just tell you a lot of stories later. But anyway, the third element is Hong Kong's own business tycoons and other elites decided that their interests were or are more in line with the CCP's than those of the many of Hong Kongers, in the hope that to make more money, in the hope of making more money, but that doesn't alter the fact that the CCP cannot convince the majority, many of Hong Kongers, particularly young Hong Kongers, to follow its way of life.
So, well, I want to thank you, Dong, for talking to us today. I need to now ask if there is someone amongst our participants who is willing to do my job, which has always been to ask the first question after our speaker is concluded. So I'll throw it over to Lisa to handle that.
Well, thank you so much. I am trying to promote our first person, Mr. Flip Todd, to a panelist so he can ask a question. I think big takeaway I'm hearing from you today, Dr. Wang, is words matter, and that we should read and listen to what's coming out of China, and what they're saying while it's changing is what they mean. So that was a really great takeaway. And Flip, I think you should be on. I don't see you. Paul, do you want to ask another question until we see Flip? He is figuring this out and getting on camera.
Oh, well, he's got his hand up. So
you can ask another question. I'll keep on working on the technical side with him.
Okay. So if there's one kind of last question I think I would really like to ask, it's what is, I think, the most fundamental thing about the PRC today that Americans get wrong? And flip that. What's the most fundamental thing about the United States that Chinese get wrong? Oh, and don't forget to turn on your microphone again.
I think for many years, I would say at least for half a century, Americans, particularly I think many elites, dealt with the PRC on the false assumption that the more engagement and particularly economic development would lead to an ultimate the ultimate democratization of the PRC. And then, despite all the verbal, I would say some people criticized our own country for its prior, I'm quoting, toothless approaches to the PRC, and then many people hope on the part of Uncle Sam. Words can be matched by actions. So that's one aspect. Then the other side, I think for the PRC, may I say that these days, I think a lot of American policymakers and intellectuals try very hard actually to distinguish the Chinese people from its government and the ruling party. So I think I should say the same. As I said before, several times, the Chinese people's tenacity, hardworking, so many attributes are very well respected by Americans. But I think then, speaking of the challenges for the PRC to deal with Uncle Sam, well, that is, I think, is for the CCP to have more sensitivity towards other people's feelings and frustration. So they also to be able to provide the real fair treatment to foreigners, reciprocity to foreign businesses and other, goodwill Americans. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And right, so Lise, you can take it away.
Great. Flip, I see that you're there. If you can turn on your audio and your video, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Starting. Okay. The U.S. appears to be taking a posture versus China that's emerging as assembling allies, multiple countries, particularly in Europe, Japan, et cetera, much as we're doing with Russia, to form some kind of united group to compete economically and otherwise with China. In this, what appears to be an emerging bipolar world between the United States and China, who do you see as China's most likely allied countries?
Thank you so much for your question. That's a good question. And I don't have a firm answer. It's because I think the United States has been actually imposing more and more pressure and effectively through its own allies and friends around the world, because I think the American-led international order has a great deal of appeals to the majority of the world, of different countries. So now, speaking of China's allies, not many, and it's also open for debate, I think, for debate. Pakistan, maybe, but there has been some anti-Chinese protests against what some Pakistani view as exploitation of their own country. So, and that has been underreported, I think. So maybe Pakistan and maybe Cambodia, but Cambodia, it's also another open question. So maybe, and I would say perhaps, but it says openly North Korea, but in private, a lot of even Chinese would not agree to that. So it's because of South Korea's, mainly South Korea's adoption of the THAAD, the anti-missile system. Then it simply, I think, also angered the PRC. So. Of course, I know these days we know China started to play a larger role in the Middle East, like in Iran, in Turkey, particularly. I think both countries' foreign ministers are visiting there. So that's my best answer, I think.
I'm going to follow that up with a question that's here in our Q&A from one of our audience members, following up on this question of alignment when we talk about the Arctic. And this question is, how do you see US-China relations advancing in relation to the Arctic? Is it more likely to find common ground with us in this frontier, or will China align itself more closely with Russia, with whom they seem more ideologically similar?
Thank you for this question. Obviously, Russia works more with the PRC, but both countries actually have many conflicts or even potential conflicts. In the case of Kazakhstan, for example, Many analysts have indicated that virtually, Kazakhstan is where actually President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road initiative. So, and with a great deal of the PRC investment, but now due to the unrest and uprising, then the Russian quickly quelled down the uprising with its own military forces. So the conflict was there. Also, another conflict zone for both countries, for Russia and PRC, is Russia's Far East, with basically, with a lot of really huge amount of the PRC influence there in the Russian Far East. I was reading actually Missioner's book on Alaska, the very beginning of the discovery of Alaska, obviously had to do with the Peter the Great, and which means that Russia's Far East is a great deal, means a great deal for Russia. So in terms of the Arctic, the competition, I think it will be interesting to see who will be able to make the rules governing the navigation and the transport there. But right now, in terms of the infrastructure, the PRC has built several major railway lines all the way into Europe. It's been actively used. So obviously the maritime navigational channels are critical for the PRC national interests.
And we are out of time, but I just want a one-word answer to this question that's also up in our Q&A function about climate change. Would you say Chinese policies regarding climate change in one word are more than, the same as, or less urgent than the United States?
Very good question. Based on my latest reading of the Chinese diplomats' statement, is I think in their view, in the PRC, well, in the very representative article, that in that view, according to that article's view, is climate change is hypocritical. Basically, it boils down to the change of industrial policy and the adjustment of supply chains, and obviously technological competition.
So is that more, the same as, or less than the United States? This is a world whiz question for us, Dr. Dunscombe. What's the answer?
Well, it is. I think it is an important area for the Chinese as well. But that's what they see. They saw the West as being hypocritical and also racist. I'm not creating these terms, okay, it's quoting them. So that then, and it's not realistic there is such a dilemma. Of course, for them, they would like to, because right now, unlike the previous administration, our current administration is championing the climate change. Of course, for Alaska is all important, but in reality, how much can be achieved? That is another question. As I said already, I read to what it means to the PRC. It means simply is to continue to maintain technological innovation.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Wang and Dr. Dunscombs, for coming out here today and bringing this program possible. And thank you everyone for joining us here at the Alaska World Affairs Council and for supporting our commitment to bringing quality educational programs to you and our passion to increase all of our global competencies. If you have any questions, please send them our way. Like I said, we're going to have a post-program slide deck of some of our upcoming programs, including World Wiz Pub Trivia, Going Outside, our Student Academic World Quest, and cryptocurrency program right around the corner, as well as International Women's Day, looking at Alaska Indigenous leaders' vision for the future. So watch our slide deck, join the World Affairs Council, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you.